There comes a moment in every woman's life when she no longer chases. Not love, not validation, not success. Instead, she sits. Calm, confident, whole. And in that stillness, everything begins to find her. She becomes magnetic. But how does a woman rise into this radiant power? How does she become the queen who walks into a room and changes its energy? Without saying a word, it's not luck. It's not charm. It's energy mastery. It's identity transformation. And it begins with one decision: to stop living from memory and start creating from vision. Asterisk. There is a moment in a woman's journey when she comes face to face with a truth so profound it shatters the illusion of safety. The life she's been living isn't who she truly is. It's a version of her sculpted by memory, by pain, by loss, by repetition. And in that moment, she realizes something powerful. She's addicted, not to substances, not to people, but to familiar emotions and the identity built around them. This addiction is quiet, invisible, but it is potent. It lives in the body. It lives in the chemistry of stress, in the hormones of survival. And until she breaks this addiction, she can never become magnetic. You see, the body is the unconscious mind. It remembers everything the mind tries to forget. That betrayal lives in her tight chest, that abandonment of her shoulders, that unworthiness. It pulses in the rhythm of her breath. Over time, these feelings become her emotional home. Not because they feel good, but because they feel familiar. And the body loves the known. The known is predictable. And the predictable feels safe. If it's painful, so she wakes up every morning expecting the world to mirror her past. She braces for disappointment. She waits for rejection. And when it doesn't come, she creates it. Not because she wants to suffer, but because her biology is wired for it. Her subconscious is running an outdated program. Her thoughts are the same as yesterday. Her feelings are memorized. Her identity is recycled. And here's the truth most never speak out loud. We fall in love with our suffering because it defines us. We wear our wounds like badges. I've always struggled with money. People always let me down. No, that's not truth. It's addiction. To a story told so many times, the body thinks it's reality. But one day the queen awakens. Something inside her whispers, "This isn't who I am." And that whisper becomes a roar. She feels the tension between the woman she's been and the one she's becoming. And now she has a choice. Keep surviving the past or risk the unknown. To create the future. And this is where the real work begins. Not outside of her, but within. She begins to observe her thoughts. She starts noticing the triggers that pull her back into familiar states of fear, guilt, shame. She becomes aware of the loop. Thought creates feeling. Feeling creates behavior. Behavior confirms the identity. She realizes that every time she reacts the same way, she's reinforcing the old self. Every time she complains, she's rewiring her brain for lack. Every time she gossips, she's affirming her powerlessness. She decides no more. So she begins to sit with herself in silence, in discomfort, in truth. She learns to become familiar with unfamiliar emotions. Peace, joy, gratitude, love emotions she rarely experienced but deeply longed for. She teaches her body what it feels like to be whole without needing anything external to validate it. She practices feeling abundant without seeing it in her bank account. She practices feeling cherished before the partner ever arrives. She practices freedom before the circumstances change. And in doing so, she tells her body, "This is our new normal." Of course, the old self resists. The body craves its chemical fix. It wants to feel the anger again. It wants to sink into self-pity. It whispers, "This is who we are." But the queen breathes deeper. She sits longer. She holds the line. And the more she does, the more she breaks the bonds of her emotional past. The more she detaches from the familiar. She no longer reaches for the phone to distract her. She no longer needs chaos to feel alive. She no longer chooses suffering as a way to feel seen. And slowly, something shifts. Her energy changes. Her heart opens. Her nervous system recalibrates. She no longer wakes up dreading the day. she'll know. Longer rehearses worst-case scenarios in her mind. Instead, she begins to trust. Not because everything is perfect, but because she is becoming the version of herself she once only imagined. Her reality responds. Not because she forced it, but because she aligned with it. People treat her differently. Opportunities appear. She no longer has to chase. She no longer has to prove. Her magnetism isn't about how she looks, what she wears, or what she says. It's about the frequency she emits. And that frequency is born from inner coherence a woman no longer at war with herself. To the world, it may look like magic, but to her, it's the result of deep, intentional transformation. Because when a woman breaks her addiction to the familiar, she frees herself from the chains of repetition. She reclaims her identity from the past, and she becomes a creator, not a reactor. It's no longer defined by what happened to her by what she chooses to generate within her, and that is the moment she begins to radiate. That is when she becomes magnetic. Because the future is no longer a concept, it's a feeling she lives now. It's encoded in her thoughts, her choices, her breath. She is no longer who she was. She will never go back. Asterisk, there comes a moment. In every woman's journey, when she realizes soft painfully that waiting has cost her too much, she's waited to be chosen. She's waited to be seen. She's waited for permission to feel enough. She's waited for the external world too. Give her a reason to feel the things she's been craving on the inside. Love, peace, joy, worth. And all along, she believed that once her circumstances changed, then she could finally feel different. Once the money came, then she'd feel secure. Once the relationship arrived, then she'd feel worthy. Once someone recognized her, then she'd feel valuable. But the truth she eventually uncovers is this: the waiting has only kept her bonded to the past. You see, the human brain is a prediction machine, constantly scanning for what's familiar. And if a woman has spent years emotionally anchored to disappointment, rejection, or scarcity, then her body becomes habituated to those emotional states. The brain and body become conditioned to wake up each morning and unconsciously recreate those same feelings, not because she desires them, but because they've become her norm. Her internal chemistry is addicted to the very emotion she says she wants to heal from. She may consciously want something new, but her unconscious programming keeps her recreating the old. And so, she waits. Not out of laziness, not out of weakness, but because no one taught her the mechanics of energy. No one showed her that the body doesn't respond to hopes, it responds to frequency. No one told her that to receive a different future, she must first become it. Not when the conditions are perfect, but before there's any evidence, before the breakthrough, before the apology, before the success. That's when the real shift happens, when she stops waiting for life to deliver and starts generating the emotions of the life she wants to live. This is the moment she becomes the cause, not the effect. She wakes up, and instead of replaying the emotional memories of yesterday, she interrupts the pattern. She breathes. She tunes in. She asks, what would it feel like to be deeply in love with my life today if nothing has changed yet? And at first the answer doesn't come easily. Her body resists. It wants to reach for the phone. It wants to re-enter the loop of stress and comparison and self-doubt. But she stays. She breathes again. She moves her awareness away from the external world, away from people, places, and problems, into her inner world, into the quantum field of possibility, into the space where all potentials exist. And here, in this invisible space, she begins to construct a new emotional reality. She closes her eyes, and she sees herself as she longs to be, not as fantasy, but as instruction. The mind doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's vividly imagined. So she leans in. She imagines herself radiating confidence, speaking with clarity, walking with purpose. She sees herself waking up grateful, feeling loved, living fully. And as she does this, something extraordinary begins to happen. The brain starts to reorganize itself to match the picture. New neural pathways begin to fire. The body, no longer tethered to survival hormones, begins to feel calm, safe, open. And in that moment, she is no longer waiting, she is generating. This is the art of self-creation. It is the discipline of becoming emotionally familiar with the future before it arrives. Because if she can feel the joy of her vision now, she no longer needs to seek it outside of her. If she can cultivate the frequency of wholeness today, she stops attracting from a place of lack. Emotion is not just a response, it is a signal. A woman broadcasting lack will only attract more evidence to confirm it. A woman radiating fulfillment, regardless of conditions, becomes magnetic. The universe doesn't respond to what she wants, it responds to what she is. So now, instead of waking up in reaction to the past, she wakes up in devotion to her future. She becomes more loyal to the vision than to the memory. She catches herself when the old thoughts creep in. It's never going to change. Not enough. It's too late. Well, she hears them, but she doesn't believe them. Because she understands that those thoughts are echoes of an outdated identity, and she is no longer that woman. She is becoming someone new through choice, through repetition, through intention. The more she practices this inner work, the more her outer world begins to shift. But she doesn't do it for the shift. She doesn't generate to manipulate. She generates to align, because her peace is no longer dependent on who stays or who leaves. Her joy isn't conditional on whether the dream happens this month or next year. Her value isn't tied to how much she produces or how many people applaud her. It's internal, it's embodied. It's encoded in her energy. And that energy, it speaks before she does. People feel it. They don't know why they're drawn to her, but they are. Her presence is nourishing. Her calm is contagious. She no longer has to convince or chase. Opportunities open, conversations deepen, synchronicities increase. It's not because she hustled harder, but because her vibration shifted. She understands. Now that waiting is passive. It holds the power outside of her. But generating is alchemy. It's creation. It's power reclaimed. Every morning becomes a ceremony. Every breath, a portal. She doesn't always feel like doing the inner work, but she knows the cost of skipping it. She's tasted the emotional poverty of her past, and she's not going back. Not now. Not ever. Some days it feels subtle. It's like nothing's changing. But she trusts. Because she's no longer looking for signs, she is the sign. Her frequency is her evidence. Her elevated emotions are her proof. She smiles not because everything's perfect, but because she's in the process. She's rewiring her identity at the cellular level. She's becoming the woman she used to wait for the world to make her into. This is mastery. Not the absence of challenge, but the presence of choice. The choice to feel love where there used to be fear. The choice to feel gratitude where there used to be lack. The choice to rise emotionally, regardless of conditions. She doesn't wait for the light. She is the light. And because she shines from within, everything around her begins to rearrange to reflect it. Asterisk. Most people live their lives unaware that 95% of who they are by the time they're 35 years old is a program. A collection of thoughts, emotional reactions, behaviors, perceptions, and beliefs that are memorized, hardwired, and deeply unconscious. She, too, lived this way on autopilot, cycling through her days as if destiny were written not in her dreams but in her history. And yet, deep down, something inside her always knew. She wasn't born to be a repetition of the past. She was born to create a future. But before she could live differently, she had to become someone different. Courageous act of all, reprogramming her subconscious identity. You see, the subconscious mind is like a fertile garden. Whatever seeds are planted in it, whether positive or negative, will eventually grow into the patterns of your life. And for years, she unknowingly planted seeds of lack. She absorbed them from childhood, from culture, from trauma. Not good enough. Love is hard. People always leave. These weren't conscious thoughts. They are buried. Beliefs operating quietly, invisibly, shaping every choice, every reaction, every relationship. It didn't matter how much she read, or how much she wanted to change on the surface, until she accessed the level of the subconscious. She was bound to recreate the same story again and again. She began to understand that her identity wasn't her essence. It was a set of memorized programs, emotional patterns stored in her body, neural connections conditioned by experience, habits of thought she had never questioned, simply repeated. Her personality, what she thought of as who I am, was really just who I've practiced being. And if that was true, then something miraculous was also true. She could practice being someone else. The journey began in stillness. In the early hours of the morning, when the world was quiet and the mind more suggestible, she sat in meditation not to escape her life, but to reinvent it. She closed her eyes not to disconnect from reality, but to connect with a new one. One that hadn't happened yet, but was waiting for her in the quantum field of possibility. She wasn't just visualizing, she was rehearsing. She was installing. She was laying down new neural architecture, thought by thought, image by image. Breath by breath, at first her body resisted, wanted to go back to the familiar emotions of the past. It was addicted to the stress hormones that came from survival. Her heart would race, her mind would wander, doubt would creep in. Hey, this isn't working. I don't know how to do this. Who am I kidding? But instead of surrendering to those voices, she observed them. She watched them arise like ghosts of her old self, begging her to stay small, to stay known. And instead of engaging, she chose presence. She chose the breath. She chose to feel in every cell of her body what it would be like to live as the woman she was creating. She saw herself waking up confident, speaking with clarity, standing in love, moving through the world as if she was already the version of her who had healed. She felt it until her body began to believe it was real, because the body is always listening. And when it feels elevated emotion, when it receives the signal of joy or gratitude or empowerment, especially without any external reason, it starts to trust that a new reality is already on the way. Every day, she laid down new tracks in her brain. She knew it was science. Neurons that fire together, wire together. The more she rehearsed this future self, the more natural it became. At first, it felt like pretending. Then it felt like remembering. Eventually, it felt like truth. Because the subconscious doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's vividly imagined. It simply accepts repetition as evidence. And she gave it plenty. She also became a master of her inner environment, listened to her self-talk like a detective. She caught the old narratives mid-thought. I can't. I always mess this up. No one cares. And she replaced them not with shallow affirmations, but with coherent intention. She spoke to herself the way a loving parent would speak to a child. You are safe now. You are powerful. You are no longer who you were. And every time she did this, she sent new instructions to the subconscious. She began re-educating her inner world word by word, thought by thought. But the real transformation happened when she brought this inner work into her outer life. She started acting as her future self, even when her old self was screaming. She showed up to conversations with new boundaries. She chose rest without guilt. She pursued her vision, even when fear whispered its warnings. And the world noticed. Not because she forced it, but because she embodied it. Her energy shifted. Her posture changed. Her voice carried a different tone. She didn't need validation, because she had given it to herself. She didn't crave attention, because she had already seen herself clearly. People asked what changed, but it wasn't just one thing. It was everything. She had rewritten her identity not through willpower, but through devotion. Devotion to the woman she knew she could be. Devotion to the frequency of her future. Devotion to being the creator, not the echo. Neuroscience shows that when we consistently imagine a new version of ourselves and feel the emotions of that new identity, we begin to biologically become that person. Our brain doesn't just think differently, it looks different. Our body doesn't just feel different, it is different. We signal new genes, we alter our chemistry. We literally become a new expression of consciousness. And she felt this not just intellectually, but viscerally. She was no longer bound to who her past said she should be. She was free to choose, and it wasn't about perfection. She had days when the old self pulled hard, days when tears came without reason, days when she forgot her power. But now, she had tools. She had awareness. And awareness was the light that revealed the shadows. She no longer feared the darkness. She used it. She alchemized it. She knew that every old pattern rising to the surface was simply asking to be released, and she was no longer afraid to let go. Over time, she looked back and could barely recognize the woman she used to be, not because she hated her, but because she outgrew her. With compassion, with courage, with consciousness, she had done what most never attempt. She reprogrammed the very identity that once held her captive. Not by force, but by frequency. Not by doing more, but by becoming more. This was the revolution, not in the world around her, but in the world within her. And once she changed there, everything else followed. There is a profound shift that occurs in a woman's life when she finally recognizes the difference between surviving and creating. Most people don't even realize they've been stuck in survival for years, sometimes their entire lives. She didn't either. For the longest time, she thought her hyper-awareness, her constant planning, her inability to rest, her emotional reactivity, were all just part of being strong, of being responsible, being someone who gets things done. But what she couldn't see, what no one taught her, was that she wasn't living, she was protecting. She wasn't thriving, she was bracing. She wasn't creating, she was reacting. Survival is seductive because it feels urgent, feels necessary, but it's also a trance. And in that trance, the body becomes addicted to stress, to control, to vigilance. She'd wake up every morning already anticipating problems, rehearse painful conversations in her head that hadn't even happened. She would imagine worst-case scenarios, convincing herself she was just being prepared. But really, she was emotionally married to the familiar pain of her past. Her nervous system didn't know safety, it only knew readiness. And readiness, over time, becomes exhaustion. In survival, the brain is narrowed, the body is inflamed, the heart is armored. Everything becomes about staying ahead, avoiding pain, controlling outcomes. The hormones of stress, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, dominate the internal environment. These chemicals are powerful, but they're not meant for long-term use. They're meant for immediate danger. And yet she was living like that. Every single day, as if a threat were always around the corner, because to her subconscious mind, there was a threat: failure, abandonment, judgment. It didn't need to be physical. It only needed to be perceived. And so her body stayed tense. Her breath stayed shallow. Her thoughts ran fast and tight like a loop that never closed. In this state, she couldn't see new possibilities, only familiar problems. She couldn't access her intuition, only her fear. She couldn't open to love, only manage attachment. And the worst part was, she didn't even know another state existed. This was her normal. But something began to whisper inside her. Quiet ache for peace, for freedom, for something more than just getting through the day. It came as restlessness and frustration, then deep fatigue, and eventually it came as truth. She saw herself clearly one morning rushing through her life like it was a to-do list she couldn't finish. Her joy felt mechanical. Her laughter was rare. Her connection to the present moment was always hijacked by a problem to solve or a wound to guard. That day, she asked a question she had never dared to ask. What if I'm not actually living? What if I've only been surviving? The question was uncomfortable, but it was also liberating, because in asking it, she gave herself permission to seek a new way. Not through more effort, not through control, but through consciousness. She began to study the nature of energy, of brain waves, of heart coherence. She learned that survival operates from the lower centers of the brain: primitive, reactive, habitual. Creation, however, lives in the frontal lobe, the seat of vision, of imagination, of intention. And to move from one to the other, she would need to train herself to stop living as a reaction to her past and start living as a vision of her future. This wasn't just about mindset, it was biology. She began her mornings in meditation, not as a spiritual ritual, but as a neurological upgrade. She slowed her breath to regulate her nervous system. She opened her heart to elevate her emotional state. She practiced feeling gratitude and joy not as a response to something happening, but as a rehearsal of the life she was calling in. She started each day by reminding her body it was no longer in danger. She wasn't being abandoned. She wasn't being judged. She wasn't unsafe. She was here. She was whole. She was safe now. And this safety became her new foundation. Not the kind that comes from a bank account or a partner or external control, but the kind that comes from internal regulation, from awareness, from presence. The more she practiced, the more her body began to trust. The tension softened, the breath deepened, the urgency faded, and in its place, space opened. Space for creation. Creation feels different. It's expansive. It's intuitive. It's energized by curiosity, not fear. In creation, she no longer needed to control everything because she trusted herself to respond with clarity. She no longer clung to people because she trusted connection would come from resonance, not desperation. She no longer feared the unknown because she realized the unknown wasn't her enemy. It was her playground. It was the space where infinite potentials existed, waiting for her to tune into a new frequency. She began imagining new outcomes, not based on probability, possibility. She rehearsed not just what she wanted to do, but how she wanted to feel. She stopped asking, "What do I need to fix?" and started asking, "What would it feel like to live from love today?" She stopped responding to the world as a battlefield and began relating to it as a canvas. She became more curious, less reactive, more open, less defensive. Her emotions were no longer dictated by her circumstances, but chosen by her vision. Of course, the old self still tried to pull her back. There were days when her body craved stress, days when silence felt uncomfortable, days when she'd slip into overthinking or people-pleasing or trying to control. But she noticed now. She had awareness, and awareness broke the spell. She didn't judge herself, she redirected. She remembered who she was becoming. She remembered that creation isn't a moment, it's a practice. And in that practice, she became powerful. Not because she forced outcomes, but because she aligned her inner world with her desired reality. She realized that manifestation wasn't magic, it was coherence. The alignment of thought, emotion, and behavior toward a clear intention. When her heart and mind spoke the same language, when her actions reflected her beliefs, the universe responded not as reward, but as resonance. She no longer needed proof to believe. She believed, and the proof appeared. Not always immediately. Not always in the way she expected, but always with precision. Because creation isn't linear. It's quantum. It's the art of surrendering control while maintaining clarity. It's the discipline of showing up every day, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a channel for new realities. She didn't abandon action, but now her action was inspired. It came from a place of fullness, not fear. It flowed instead of forcing. She gave herself permission to play, to explore, to rest. She discovered that in creation, rest is productive. Joy is strategy. Presence is power. And because of that, she radiated differently. People felt it. She didn't just walk into rooms. She changed them, not with her words, but with her energy. This was the life she had always longed for, not one of perfection, but of presence. Not one of control, but of conscious creation. She no longer woke up dreading the day, anticipating problems, reacting to ghosts of her past. She woke up with intention, with trust, the knowing that she wasn't here to survive this life. She was here to create it. Asterisk, she had spent most of her life trying to be what the world told her a strong woman should be. Independent, logical, productive, self-reliant. She prided herself on never needing help, on solving problems quickly, on pushing through her emotions to get things done. She could hold the world on her shoulders and still smile. But behind the strength was a quiet ache, a tiredness that no amount of sleep could fix, a loneliness that success couldn't cure, a tension in her chest that lingered even in moments of peace. She didn't know it yet, but she was carrying the weight of a wounded feminine. The wounded feminine doesn't always look like panic, often hides in perfectionism, in people-pleasing, in overachieving. It shows up as being overly accommodating, overly responsible, or emotionally unavailable. and that's what she had become. She had disconnected from her intuition. She had silenced her softness. She had learned somewhere along the way that to be safe, she had to be in control. That to be respected, she had to be detached. That to be loved, she had to earn it. But the truth is, she had built a life that looked good on the outside by abandoning the parts of herself that lived in the shadows. Her feminine essence, her emotional depth, her sensitivity, her creative flow, her capacity to receive had been exiled to make room for what the world rewarded. Her inner child, the part of her that once believed in magic and softness and unconditional love, had learned that being vulnerable meant being hurt, that being open meant being abandoned, that being radiant meant being shamed. And so the body remembered, and the body built walls. She didn't just think like someone in survival, she felt like someone who had to protect her heart at all costs. She equated femininity with weakness because her feminine side had never been protected. It had been criticized, mocked, or neglected. She internalized the belief that, to be loved, she had to become less emotional, less intuitive, less receptive herself. But one day, something began to stir. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle. It came as a longing she couldn't ignore, desire to slow down, to soften, to feel. Not just the curated emotions she allowed herself to express, but the deeper ones: grief, longing, awe, tenderness. She realized that somewhere along the line, she had stopped trusting her heart. She had stopped listening to the quiet wisdom of her inner world, and she had started performing for a life that no longer resonated with her soul. That's when the healing began, not through another goal, not through another achievement, but through surrender, through stillness, through feeling what she had been avoiding for years. She sat with herself not as a project to fix, but as a sacred presence to honor. She let herself cry without apology. She let the pain speak without interruption. She didn't try to analyze it or spiritualize it. She simply allowed it. In that space, the wounded feminine felt seen, maybe for the first time. She started asking different questions. Not what do I need to do, but what do I need to feel? How can I prove my worth? But where did I stop believing I was already worthy? These weren't surface questions. They were invitations. To remember, she began honoring her emotions as sacred data, not as inconveniences. She stopped apologizing for her sensitivity. She stopped dimming her light to make others comfortable. She reclaimed the parts of herself that had been labeled too much, too emotional, too needy, too soft, too trusting. She realized that what others called too much was actually the depth of her feminine wisdom, her superpower. She turned inward. She created rituals of self-connection, morning stillness, evening journaling, walks in nature without a destination. She started talking to herself like someone she deeply loved. She placed her hands on her heart and reminded herself that she was safe to feel again, safe to trust, safe to be. Not because the world had changed, but because she had created safety within her own body. As she healed, she began to notice something remarkable. Her relationships shifted. She no longer attracted people who needed fixing, saving, or controlling. She no longer tolerated emotional unavailability disguised as strength. She no longer confused intensity with intimacy. She began to receive not just attention, but devotion. Not just comfort, but presence. Not just love, but reverence. Because she had returned to the place inside her that knew she deserved it, and she no longer feared being seen in her fullness. She no longer edited her truth. She no longer performed to be accepted. The mask had served its purpose, but it was no longer needed. She could be both powerful and soft. She could lead and still receive. She could speak and still listen. She could hold space for others without abandoning herself. Her body responded. The tightness in her chest loosened. Her breath deepened. Her energy softened. Her nervous system began to regulate not through force, but through compassion. Her cycles balanced. Her intuition sharpened. As a fleeting moment, but as a frequency she could access at will, it was grounded, rooted, radiant. It didn't seek attention, it magnetized it. It didn't demand love, it attracted it. It didn't chase success, it embodied it. This wasn't about rejecting the masculine. It was about integrating it, balancing it, letting her inner masculine protect and support her feminine, not dominate it. Letting action be led by intuition. Letting structure serve flow. Letting logic dance with emotion. She was no longer a woman at war with herself. She was a woman in harmony. And in that harmony, she found her greatest power, not in how much she could do, but in how fully she could be. She became the kind of woman who didn't just walk into a room, she transformed the room with her presence. Not because of what she said, but because of who she had become, because she had done the deepest work of all. She had healed the wounded feminine, and in doing so, she came home to herself. Asterisk, there's a power most people never learn to harness, not because it's hidden, but because it's constantly being given away. That power is attention. Where your attention goes, your energy flows. And for years, she had no idea she was bleeding energy everywhere. Every time she replayed a conversation in her mind that left her feeling unworthy, every time she scrolled past someone else's highlight reel and shrank in comparison, every time she relived the same emotional story about why life never worked out for her. She was scattering her power across realities she didn't want. Her attention had become like sunlight through a fogged window, diffused, unfocused, and weak. The life she was trying to manifest remained just out of reach. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because her energy was too divided to create it. The truth is, the brain doesn't care whether the subject of your focus is wanted or unwanted. It doesn't care if you're remembering or imagining, reacting or rehearsing. It simply reinforces whatever you repeatedly focus on. Neurons that fire together, wire together. And the more she focused on the problems, the more deeply wired those problems became, not just in her thinking, but in her biology. Her body became addicted to stress, to worry, to proving her worth through overthinking. Her chemistry adjusted to match her focus. Her identity became entangled with distraction, and yet, beneath all the noise, something deeper was always trying to get her attention, a quiet whisper of her future self, calling her back to her power. She felt it on those rare mornings when she woke up early and heard the stillness before the world rushed in. That voice said, "You weren't meant to live in pieces. You're meant to be fully present, fully powerful, fully awake." Whatever she consistently gave her attention to, she was feeding with energy. Her worries fed. Her regrets fed. Her fears about the future. And whatever she fed grew. It was law. It was science. It was reality. And so she made a decision, a sacred, internal commitment. I will no longer give my energy to anything that takes me out of alignment with who I'm becoming. From that moment, she began to treat her attention as her most precious currency, more valuable than money, more powerful than time, because her attention didn't just observe, it created. If she focused on what was missing, she reinforced lack. If she focused on pain, she reinforced suffering. But if she focused on possibility, if she trained her mind to hold the image of who she was becoming again and again and again, then her entire being would begin to conform to that future. This wasn't a one-time decision. It was a daily practice. She began her mornings in silence, turning inward, choosing where to place her awareness before the world could steal it. Instead of checking notifications, she checked in with her body. Instead of rehearsing stress, she rehearsed gratitude. She asked herself, what is the most important thing for me to align with today? Not, what do I have to do, but who do I have to be? And when old thoughts came, because they always do, she didn't judge them. She simply noticed, and then she redirected. Like training a wild horse, she brought her attention back, again and again, to the vision, to the elevated emotions of her future self, to the feeling of already being her. She learned that focus wasn't about effort. It was about frequency. It was about holding a vibration long enough for it to begin shaping her biology. The more she practiced, the stronger her mental muscle became. She stopped engaging in gossip. She stopped feeding stories that kept her small. She stopped watching content that lowered her energy. Not because someone told her to, but because her nervous system began to crave coherence. Her body, her mind, her soul all started seeking alignment. She noticed how easily the world pulls people into distraction, to drama, into disconnection. But she was no longer available for it. She became a woman of sacred discipline. Not rigid, not controlling, but intentional. Her yes meant something. Her no became a boundary of self-love. Her time became sacred space, because she knew that. Every moment she stayed focused on her vision, she was literally reshaping her future. Her relationships changed. She stopped giving her attention to people who only took. She stopped explaining herself to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding her. She started pouring into connections that were reciprocal, regenerative, and real. People asked her what changed, and she would smile gently. Knowing it wasn't one big moment, it was 1,000 small choices to focus on what expanded her, not what drained her. She began creating from a place of power. Her work became more purposeful. Her ideas flowed with clarity. Her words carried weight. She no longer waited for motivation. She was moved by vision. And that vision was no longer some distant dream. It was alive inside her. She breathed it. She rehearsed it. She became it. She used her focus to reprogram not only her thoughts, but her identity. Because when you hold a vision long enough, the subconscious begins to accept it as truth. The body begins to believe it. The environment begins to shift around it. Suddenly, the world starts to reflect back the very image you've been holding in your heart all along. She understood now that most people live in reaction. They give their attention to whatever is loudest, most urgent, most emotionally charged. But she had transcended that level of consciousness. She lived by design, not by default. Her attention had become a laser not scattered light, but a concentrated beam of creation. And with it, she shaped a life that matched her frequency, her truth, her soul. Because she had mastered her attention, she had mastered her reality. Asterisk. She used to be afraid of her emotions, not because they were unfamiliar, but because they were overwhelming. When sadness visited, it stayed for days. When anger arose, it came with guilt. When shame surfaced, it buried her in silence. Like many, she had been taught either directly or through subtle messages that emotions were something to manage, suppress, or avoid. That strength meant controlling them, that maturity meant not letting them get in the way. But what no one told her was that unprocessed emotions don't disappear. They embed themselves in the body. They live in the tissues. They shape posture, tone of voice, choices. They form emotional signatures that, when repeated enough, become an identity. So for years she performed strength. She smiled while carrying invisible burdens. She pushed through pain while pretending it didn't exist. But the body never lies. The body always remembers. And eventually, it started speaking louder through anxiety, through exhaustion, through chronic tension that no amount of rest could heal. Her heart ached, but not for a person. It ached for her own attention, for her own presence, for her own truth. That was the beginning. The moment she stopped asking, "How do I fix this?" and started asking, "What is this emotion trying to teach me?" something profound shifted. She began to see her emotions not as problems, but as portals, not as weaknesses, but as wisdom. She stopped labeling them as good or bad, positive or negative. She began to meet them all with curiosity, with reverence, with the understanding that each feeling carried a frequency, and that every frequency held an invitation. She learned that emotional alchemy isn't about denial or distraction, not about thinking positive or pretending everything's fine. It's the courageous act of turning inward and sitting in the fire without running from the heat. It's choosing to stay present with grief long enough to hear its message. It's listening to the tremble in your own voice and choosing compassion over criticism. It's facing the fear that says you're not enough and replying with, "I am still worthy of love." So she began a new kind of practice. When shame rose, instead of spiraling into judgment, she placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "I see you. I know where you come from. But I no longer believe the story you're attached to." When anger flared, she didn't bury it. She explored it. She asked what boundary had been crossed, what pain had gone unspoken. She allowed herself to feel without exploding, to express without hurting, to honor the signal beneath the surge. When loneliness crept in like a fog, she didn't numb it. She lit a candle, sat in stillness, and said, "You're welcome here. You are part of my healing." She stopped asking others to rescue her from her emotions. She stopped outsourcing her regulation to people who could not hold space for their own. She became the safe place she had always searched for, sanctuary within herself. A woman who could sit in her own chaos and breathe her way back to calm. Not because life stopped being difficult, but because she no longer feared the depth of her own waters. As she practiced, something miraculous began to happen. Her emotions, once so heavy, began to shift. Sadness transformed into softness. Anger transformed into clarity. Fear transformed into trust. She realized that emotions were not enemies, they were energy in motion. And when she allowed them to move through her, they became her teachers, not her tormentors. They didn't define her, they refined her. This wasn't about controlling how she felt. It was about choosing how she responded to how she felt. It was about using every emotional wave as an opportunity to elevate her consciousness. Every reaction became a mirror, every trigger, a teacher, every discomfort, an initiation. She no longer asked, "Why is this happening to me?" She asked, "What in me is ready to be transformed?" She realized that the more she healed emotionally, the more powerful her energy became. Because emotions carry charge, and that charge either limits your frequency or expands it. When you transmute fear into faith, you shift timelines. When you alchemize pain into purpose, you magnetize new opportunities. When you turn your wounds into wisdom, you become unshakable. Not untouched by life, but untouched by unconsciousness. Others started to notice there was something different in her presence. A stillness, a grounded warmth, a kind of radiance that didn't need to be loud to be felt. People came to her not just for advice, but for energy. She wasn't performing peace shy, embodied it. Not because she had no emotions, but because she had made peace with all of them. And in doing so, she became the alchemist of her own life. She learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about reclaiming her power from it. That emotions weren't meant to be managed, they were meant to be metabolized. That strength wasn't the absence of feeling, it was the willingness to feel deeply and still choose love. Now, when storms come in, they still do. She no longer tightens in resistance. She opens, she breathes, she listens. She trusts that no emotion is final, that all of them are just visitors. That her job is not to control them, but to welcome them, honor them, and let them pass. She knows that true freedom isn't in avoiding pain, it's in learning how to transform it, because that's what an alchemist does. She takes what others throw away, the grief, the regret, the reject, turns it into gold, into art, into power, into wisdom. She doesn't wait for the world to change, she becomes the change by changing her internal world. And from that place, she doesn't just survive, she creates. She leads. She inspires. She heals. Because she understands the greatest magic isn't in avoiding the darkness, it's in turning on the light. Asterisk, there comes a point in her evolution where she no longer needs to fight the past. She doesn't need to fix it, explain it, or revisit it over and over again to understand why it happened. That's the moment she realizes she's done trying to rewrite an old story by reliving its pages. The shift is quiet, but irreversible. She no longer carries the frequency of the woman who tolerated what broke her. She becomes energetically unavailable to the old patterns. Old identities, old pain, old versions of herself that only knew survival. And it's not because she's angry. It's not because she hates the past. It's because it no longer lives in her body. You see, the body is a living archive. It remembers everything the mind has tried to forget. Every time she betrayed herself to be liked, every time she stayed silent to keep the peace, every time she shrank so someone else wouldn't feel threatened by her light. These moments left emotional signatures, chemical imprints etched into her nervous system. And for years, they broadcasted a signal, not through words, but through energy, through posture, tone, reactivity, thought patterns. And she didn't even know she was radiating lack, unworthiness, guilt. Because when pain is familiar, it becomes invisible. But the moment she became conscious of the signal she was sending out, she understood something radical. She had the power to change it. Not by faking confidence, not by forcing positivity, but by doing the deep inner work of rewiring her state of being. And as she did, her body stopped craving the emotional chemicals of the old identity. She stopped waking up, rehearsing pain. She stopped reliving betrayal through her thoughts. She stopped expecting rejection, because her energy no longer aligned with those timelines. This didn't happen all at once. It happened through a series of choices, small, sacred decisions that recalibrated her frequency. She started observing her thoughts with presence instead of believing every one of them. She watched when her old self wanted to reach out to someone who no longer respected her. She noticed when a familiar trigger invited her back into chaos. And instead of reacting, she paused. She breathed. She chose again. It's not from the old self. From the new one, the future self she had been rehearsing every morning in silence. The one who already lived in peace. Energetic unavailability is not defense. It's alignment. It's not avoidance. It's evolution. It's what happens when you raise your baseline frequency so consistently that anything not vibrating at that level simply cannot attach to you. The old habits don't stop calling, you stop answering. The old patterns don't magically disappear, you stop embodying the version of you that was compatible with them. She noticed how her triggers lost their grip. How the same conversation that once unraveled her now met her calm. How the invitation to prove her worth didn't even register anymore because she no longer questioned it. She didn't need validation. She didn't need closure. She didn't need revenge. She had moved into a new, energetic address, and anyone who knocked on the door of her old self found no one home. And here's what most people miss. This isn't about cutting people off. It's not about building walls. It's about becoming so internally coherent that only the aligned can stay. It's about shifting your internal resonance so dramatically that only what matches your new state feels familiar. The rest, it feels heavy, feels off, it feels distant. Not because you're judging it, but because your body, your energy, your entire field is no longer a match. That's the thing about transformation. It's not personal. It's vibrational. She no longer had to tell people she'd changed. They could feel it. She no longer had to force boundaries. Her energy became one. She no longer had to run from the past. It simply couldn't find her anymore. Because she wasn't vibrating at the level of pain, of scarcity, of resentment. She had metabolized those emotions, transmuted them. She had felt the grief all the way through. She had held the inner child who once believed love meant suffering. She had forgiven not because they deserved it, but because she deserved freedom. And when that inner healing happened, the field around her reorganized itself. Now, when old situations tried to reappear at names, same lessons, she didn't fall into old roles. She didn't shrink. She didn't people please. She met them with stillness. She met them with clarity. She met them with the knowing that her worth was no longer on the table. And without the familiar emotional charge, those old dynamics had nowhere to land. They dissolved not by effort, but by elevation. She understood now that everything is energy. Healing isn't just about talking through pain. It's about removing the frequency of the wound from the body. It's about rewiring the nervous system to feel safe in joy, safe in receiving, safe in not being needed, safe in stillness. And that safety became her new home. She no longer confused chaos with love. She no longer entertained relationships that required her to abandon herself. She no longer mistook urgency for alignment. She waited not in fear, but in faith for what matched her new vibration. Because she knew that true alignment never requires her to shrink. It expands her. It nourishes her. It reminds her of who she really is. And that's what it means to become energetically unavailable to the old. It means your nervous system no longer finds comfort in dysfunction. Your body no longer craves the adrenaline of emotional drama. Your mind no longer entertains limiting beliefs. Your spirit no longer tolerates anything that disconnects you from truth. This wasn't about being hard. It was about being clear. It wasn't about being cold. It was about being whole. She didn't close her heart. She just stopped giving it to people who didn't know how to hold it. She didn't stop loving. She just stopped betraying herself in the name of love. And that is where her power multiplied. Because when a woman becomes unavailable to everything that once drained her, she becomes magnetic to everything that now nourishes her. She wasn't waiting for a new life. She was the new life. Not because she forced a change, because she became the change. Through alignment. Through energy asterisk, the queen doesn't fear the void between who she was and who she's becoming. She welcomes uncertainty, like a sacred space. In the unknown, she creates. In the unseen, she trusts. And that trust, it makes her magnetic beyond measure. Every morning, she blesses her body with health. She blesses her heart with love. She blesses her path with purpose. She blesses the life she hasn't yet lived because her belief is the signal and her emotion is the magnet asterisk. So if you're hearing this, it's not by accident. There is a queen inside you waiting to rise. A magnetic woman, encoded with divine power, ready to break free from the past and create a future beyond imagination. The question is not if you can become her. The question is, are you ready to stop chasing and start attracting? If this message resonated with you, share it with a sister who needs to awaken her power. Drop A in the comments if you're ready to step into your magnetic self, and tell us below. What part of you are you ready to rewire today? Your energy is your message. Your heart is your magnet. Your time is now.